and I'm a principal consultant here at Assetivity. I'd like to take a few minutes today to talk to you about the fundamentals of asset management. These fundamentals are four concepts that form the basis for the discipline of asset management and its implementation in an organisation. Implementing asset management typically results in significant improvements in at least one of performance, cost or risk outcomes around the assets. And really therefore it should be a critical concern in any asset intensive industry. The three documents are ISO 55000, which provides an overview of the topic and the principles, ISO 55001, which defines the requirements for a compliant asset management system, and ISO 55002, which gives some guidelines on implementing. Now together these documents represent a consensus of experts of what good asset management is, and that's why I really like these fundamentals which come directly out of ISO 55000. If you want to read them verbatim, you can find them in section 2.4.2 of that standard, but otherwise I'm going to cover the gist of them today and give you my opinion on why they're important and how they might be of help to your organisation. And really what this is about is ensuring that the organisation gets things in the right order. First we work out what we need to achieve, and then we go and work out what assets we need to do it. And most organisations get this right at the start of their life when they're first buying assets, but they tend to lose track of it over time and end up looking after assets for their own sake rather than for the value they can provide. The second fundamental is alignment, and the tagline text here is that asset management translates the organisational objectives into technical and financial decisions, plans and activities. And really what we're talking about here is taking that definition of value, tracking it through the asset base and how it's going to be delivered, and then planning to undertake specific actions on the assets that will deliver that value. Now that's great, but that only takes you as far as a set of actions. In order to get those actions completed, you absolutely have to have leadership in the organisation, and hence that's that third fundamental. Now leadership is a driver of culture, and therefore the ISO standard puts these two together and says that leadership and workplace culture are determinants of value realisation. They work together to ensure that the actions you've identified are appropriately resourced and are actually completed. It's about discipline and about getting the job done. Our last fundamental is assurance, and really assurance is about making sure that we are getting out of this process what we wanted to get. It's about checking in feedback to ensure that what is being done is delivering the outcomes that we're expecting. Asset management gives assurance that assets will fulfill their required purpose. So what we see is this feedback is built in as a fundamental part of the asset management discipline. So together these four fundamentals form the first principles on which an asset management system could be built. Regardless of your stance on ISO 55000, you can apply these principles to assess your own asset management performance by asking simple questions. Value: what is it that the organisation wants me to deliver? Alignment: how will I achieve that? Leadership: who will I need to get involved? How will I influence them? And lastly, assurance: is it working? Am I getting what I want? Now of course there's far more to each of these topics, and I'll look a little bit deeper at each of them in turn next. Starting with, of course, value. So as we've already established, value is about understanding what we want to achieve. And the first thing that will come to mind for most people is return on investment. How much money are we going to make versus the money that we've put into this particular asset? And that is true, and that is a tangible financial outcome that we're interested in, and it does define value for a lot of organisations. But it's not value for everybody, and it's never the only definition of value. So if we think about the public sector, their definition of value usually focuses on the delivery of a service. If you think about a public transport agency in that sector, they ask themselves the question, what is my on-time running like? So we've already established that value is about knowing what we want to achieve from the assets. Now, the first thing that will jump into most people's minds is return on investment. This is a tangible financial recognition of what the assets are doing for us. And it definitely is a part of value for many organisations. But it's not always a part of value, and it's never the only part. If we go to the public sector, we'll usually find that service delivery is the key component of value. The public transport agencies I've worked with look at on-time running as one of the key measures of whether they're getting the job done. And in addition, even in the most cash-hungry organisation in the private sector, we'll find that it's not just about the money. Those guys still recognise the value of a corporate reputation, the value of being seen to do the right thing, and also of compliance with social and environmental and safety requirements that are levied on them, where the penalties could be prison for their executives, or major fines, or losses of licence. Once you start thinking about it, most organisations have multiple dimensions of value. And what's more, these often stretch over the whole life cycle and they interact in complex ways. So if we think about a mining organisation and we look at their whole truck fleet, we might ask ourselves questions like, how much more should I pay during acquisition for a 1% improvement in availability in service? How much might I be prepared to pay for a 1% reduction in safety risk? What should I do to avoid the risk of obsolescence? When should I retire the vehicles? And what's more, should I drive them harder and get more production, or should I use them a bit more gently and get more resale value out of them? It's clear that making the right decision in each of the above cases requires understanding of value to the entire organisation and across the entire life cycle. Obtaining this understanding ultimately comes down to engaging the stakeholders, asking them what they want, what are their needs, what are their expectations, what are their requirements. Now, these stakeholders are going to be many and varied. Typically, you have, of course, the organisational owners and shareholders, but you'll also have regulators, you'll have internal staff, you'll have customers, and you'll even consider your suppliers as part of your stakeholder base. And you need to engage all of these. And in some cases, they'll be able to articulate clearly what they want. Regulators are usually reasonable at this, but in other cases, they won't. In any case, you need to persevere, because until you understand what value is to the organisation, you haven't got a hope of delivering it. So let's proceed to the second fundamental, alignment. And as we've already seen, this is about establishing a plan of action to deliver the value that we've identified. Now, we're not going to be able to achieve everything that we want. Even if we just had return on investment as our definition of value, we'd like infinite return on investment, but that would require infinite investment, and obviously that's not possible. When we put this in conjunction with all of the safety requirements, the environmental requirements, other requirements that might be levied on the organisation in that definition of value, it's going to get really tricky and we're never going to get to perfection. What we can do though is ask ourselves what actions are achievable that will get us as close as possible to those targets. In order to answer that question, we're going to need to dive down into the detail of the organisation, how it does its business, and how the asset base delivers that value. If we imagine the example of a water utility, they're quite likely to have an element of value associated with the quality of their drinking water. That's something that they'll be trying to achieve, high quality drinking water. In order to achieve that, if we dig down into the asset base, we'll find that the chlorinator equipment is key to that. And therefore there's probably a reliability target that needs to be achieved for that chlorinator equipment in order to ensure the drinking water quality. If we dig down into the chlorinator equipment, we'll find that the mechanical workforce needs to have particular inspection and repair skills in order to maintain that piece of equipment, in order to achieve the reliability goal, in order to achieve the drinking water quality goal. So we see that there's a vertical alignment of the requirements. Equally, we can look across the organisation, and if we do that, what we'd see is things like those workforce technicians need particular skills, and the only way they're going to get them is either through recruitment, which is going to require activity from the HR department, or they're going to need training, which is a learning and development activity. If we look at the chlorinator itself, sure, our mechanics have got it working, but it needs a power supply, and that means somewhere in the switch room there's another asset that needs to operate reliably in order to support this equipment. And those sorts of horizontal interactions are also typical in an asset management environment, and we need to understand them. Once we've got those objectives established at each level and for each piece of equipment, we're going to need to analyse our performance against them. To do that, we're going to need some information, we're going to need some decision tools, and we're going to need some processes for bringing it all together. When we apply those, we're going to come up with a series of gaps. And then our job is to fill them with the actions. Once we've established traceable objectives for the equipment, we're going to need to understand how we're performing against these so we can work out where we need to take action. This is not only our current performance but also our future performance. And to make the assessment, we're going to need to look at information on the condition of the assets, information on the performance trends, and we're also going to need some analysis tools to dig into it and some processes to bring it all together so we get a cohesive picture. Our analysis is going to identify a series of gaps, and we're going to need to establish actions that will fill these. For example, our chlorinator equipment might need upgrading, so we might need to go to a capital procurement or project management process. Or it may just need the maintenance tactics redeveloped. We might need reliability centered maintenance. Or possibly the technicians in the workforce just need extra training in the skills that they need. So we might need some training needs analysis and some learning and development activity. No matter what the gap is, and there are many, there will be an action that we can take to fulfill it. Each of these actions draws on particular processes and tools within the organisation, and our job is to make sure that these are available. If they're not, that's another gap that we need to fill. Once we've got all of our gaps established, the next task is to roll these up to a cohesive plan at the higher level of the organisation. As we've already said, we're not going to be able to do everything, so we need to prioritise. And we also need to make sure that any emergent work gets done as well. So if we're going to upgrade that chlorinator, maybe we also need to upgrade the switch room so that we get the right power supply. Or maybe we need to retrain our technicians so that they've got the right skills and they're not applying old maintenance techniques to new equipment. Equally, we need to ask ourselves where the priority is. Is it on this chlorinating equipment, or is it on replacing aging pipes, or is it on replacing or expanding the desalination plant? If we're following this fundamental, what we'll end up with is a robust planning process that produces clear, achievable actions that can be performed by the organisation, and also that are prioritised and aimed at delivering in as optimal a fashion as possible the value the organisation has identified. So now that we've got a plan, we're going to need to implement it, and that brings us to the third fundamental, leadership. Now, leadership can occur at any level of an organisation, but it starts at the top, and it's absolutely critical to getting anything done, anytime, anywhere. If the leadership doesn't care about achieving an objective, it won't be long before the rest of the organisation doesn't care either, and you can pretty much guarantee that objective will fail. There are tomes written on leadership, and I don't intend to repeat them here, but it is particularly important that leadership in asset management starts at the very top. This is because of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to understand value to the whole organisation, and this is really only usually visible at the very top level. Equally, we're trying to make major capital investments and other significant decisions, and the approval for these resources is also usually retained at the very top level. The boardroom, the C-suite. These are the people who can approve major asset investments or major changes to policy, and these are the sort of things we might need to do in asset management. So the main role of leadership in asset management is simply to demonstrate visible commitment to the process. This is done by monitoring the completion of actions and taking appropriate responses, and I'll come back to this in the assurance phase. But it's also about making sure that the right resources are allocated, and this includes not only people with the correct training and competencies, but also money where required. And it also requires allocation of roles and responsibilities so that those people have the authority to get on and do the things that they need to do. If management is watching, it can be amazing what an organisation can achieve, and that's what this step's all about, watching. This brings us to the last fundamental, assurance. And as we've already established, this is about checking and feedback to make sure that the outcomes that are being achieved are the outcomes that are desired. Either way, the first priority is to establish measures that will alert the organisation to the existence of a problem. There could be a number of reasons why an organisation is not achieving the expected outcomes, but really we can put these into two categories. The first is that we set the wrong actions in the first place, and the second is that we simply haven't completed them. Either way, the first priority is establishing some measures that will give us the information as to whether we're achieving the expected outcomes or not. When we look at establishing our measures, we need to make sure that we don't focus solely on the asset. We also need to look at the other areas that actions cover, the asset management practices in general and the asset management system itself. And we need to make sure that these are working as expected as well. We can't expect the reliability of our equipment to improve while we've got a spare parts management issue that means that our maintainers can't fix things that break. What it's probably worth doing is asking yourself the question, how would each measure in my organisation lead to a change? If you can't answer that question, then it's quite likely that that particular measure is not a key measure at all. So that brings us to the end of our 4 fundamentals, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to recap with some key points to take home before I finish. The first of these is that through the ISO 55000 process, we've come up with 4 fundamental concepts in asset management that form the basis for the discipline. These are value, knowing what we want to achieve before we work out what actions we need to take on the assets. Alignment, planning our actions to realise that value. Leadership, ensuring that the resources are available to complete those actions. And assurance, checking that we have achieved the outcomes that we needed, that we haven't fallen off the rails somewhere along the way. These 4 fundamentals are built into the ISO 55000 series of standards on every level, and you should certainly consider having a look at those standards if you haven't already. Even if you're not interested in applying ISO 55000, however, you can still use these 4 fundamental concepts to benefit your business, simply by asking yourself simple questions. What is it the organisation wants me to deliver? How am I going to go about achieving that? Who am I going to involve and how do I influence them? And lastly, am I getting it? Am I going where I need to go, or have I fallen off the rails? Thanks for your time. If you'd like more information on this or asset management in general, please don't hesitate to contact me on the details that are on the screen there. Goodbye.